All right, so welcome everyone to this month's Data Stewardship Trends to Watch. It's unbelievable that we're already in March, but here we are, and we're almost in April. So next time we're going to do an April Fool's Data Stewardship Trends to Watch and see what comes up at the level of data stewardship. But what we hope to do today is to report back on some of the developments, some of the trends that we have identified within the context of the fourth wave of open data. And of course, many of you know what we mean by the fourth wave of open data. Uh, we had multiple waves. The first wave of open data was really focused on freedom of information. Second wave was really focused on open government portals. The third wave was then more focused on accessing also other data sources beyond government data, including private sector data through data collaboratives. And of course, the fourth wave, which we are currently experiencing, is where AI is becoming increasingly more important, both in the sense of open data contributing to AI in order to improve, for instance, factual AI or to improve the way we augment existing models or even fine-tune them. But also, of course, and this is where we're gonna focus on a little bit more today, where AI is becoming a tool for democratizing access to data as well, and both in terms of providing a conversational interface, but also in terms of identifying where data might reside and then subsequently leveraging that as well. In addition to the fourth wave of open data, for those who are calling in from New York, also happy Open Data Week, because I know different parts of the world are celebrating open data at different moments in time. But this week here in New York, they only have scheduled 90 events in the context of Open Data Week. So everyone is very busy. But one of the key elements that comes back through Open Data Week here in New York is, of course, the increasing use and the increasing use cases as it relates to MCP. And we've shared that before as well, that MCP, or Model Context Protocol, which is a new protocol that was introduced last year by Anthropic, which really tries to make open data and data AI ready by kind of connecting it with AI agents as well. We see that MCP is becoming increasingly more important to also provide access to open data. And so one of the use cases that has become kind of a use case that many are referring to is the use case in Boston. And so Boston has developed an MCP server, and let me see whether I can show this, an MCP server to connect open data in a way that becomes conversational. And so this is kind of the server that they have developed. We will put the link also in the chat, or it's in the it's going to be in the slide deck, of course, as well. But what we see here is that anyway, they have kind of an MCP server that you can install, and then you can start asking questions to the Open Data Portal in a conversational manner, so that it becomes easier to actually know what data is there, and also to then have a better way to extract insight from the data beyond having to download the data set and then to have kind of a model to apply it as well. We also see this here in New York, where we have the Civic AI tools that was kind of launched 2 weeks ago, which again is an MCP layer on top of the New York City open data catalog. And so if you go to Civic AI tools, you basically can type in, like for instance, I don't know if anyone has any questions, but anyway, so what data, anyway, as you know, the most popular data source in the open data portal in New York City is the data source, the 311 data source as it relates to noise complaints. So what data exists? Let me see. So this is also not just about getting insight, but also to find data, right? So this is what I meant by MCP can also be a source and a tool for discoverability and findability of data. So what data exists with regard to noise. And so let's see what it says. This is a live demo, which means that it always fails. But so as you can see, it does kind of the construction. First of all, it translates the query into an additional query that then makes sense from a data perspective. So here it says, well, it's environmental noise data, traffic noise data, occupational noise data, health impact studies, noise complaint, soundscape studies, noise mapping and modeling. So all of this can then be found. And so this is then where you can see what are some of the sources that are there. And this is then, of course, the element that you had there. So as you can see, this is kind of a tool. It's anyway, whether it's perfect yet, it's definitely still to be fine-tuned, but it's another experiment where you actually have a better way to engage with open data than you had before as well. Now, the other element that we see happening is, and again, this was produced for Open Data Week, of course, is where you then start having kind of AI agents that you can activate in order to, for instance, in this case, to do policy analysis. And so this is kind of another interesting application. And again, cloud enabled, where you can actually ask an AI agent to develop a policy analysis. And in this case, a policy analysis to inform, for instance, housing policy to Mayor Mamdani. And so what it does, and so this is no, this is not it. Here, this is the one. So you basically create this policy analyst agent. You describe a role for the agent, what kind of skills the agent has, which, by the way, automatically gets developed by Claude. And then you add some data sources, and then you get kind of a policy analysis that could be relevant for policymakers with regard to what is the median asking rent in New York, which is about 3,500 per month, which is the median one. What's the rent burden? The fact that most people in New York spend 50% of their income on rent, right? Which is why everyone is worried about affordability, right? Because typically affordability as it relates to rent is about 30% maximum. And then we also then have other kind of data points that get presented, right, in a easy downloadable kind of policy analysis as well. Now, there's many others that are working on policy analysis AI agents. I didn't share them here, but this is becoming kind of a use case for government where they are developing kind of conversational layers. Actually, I saw I tested out another policy analyst agent, which is not public yet, and they basically produce kind of almost in real time a memo for the mayor. The question here was, how should we get free and fast buses in New York City? And I have to say, the memo was as impressive as one can see, where you would typically have kind of a expensive consultancy agency developing a memo with all kinds of pros, cons, and options, and then real data sets that support as well, which of course, anyway, isn't as promising for all those consultancy agencies, but it also shows within government, if you have those agents, you can actually make faster and more informed decision making as well if you connect it with kind of open data or data to a large extent. So that's kind of, as I said, this is kind of a typical example of the fourth wave of open data, where we see AI being used to democratize access to data and also democratize the generation of data insights. And all of this, I mean, as I said, MCP was just released last year. is kind of changing in real time, right? So I mean, every day people send me another example of how MCP can be used as well. Now, at the same time, doesn't mean that the concerns and the limitations of generative AI are fully gone. And so this is kind of a piece that was published this month with regard to, again, emphasizing the importance of context if you start using generative AI, which also, by the way, uh, uh, is an indication, and that some of you might have seen this trend, where in the past, I mean, last year, we were talking about prompt engineering. Now everyone is talking about context engineering. And so we see this shift from prompt engineering to context engineering because it turns out that without appropriate context and especially additional kind of metadata sources and additional kind of interpretation of a particular kind of output, we still see a lot of limitations with regard to Gen AI. And especially we see proxy, as this paper says, proxy fragility, which is basically where particular indicators might be seen as flawed proxies. Like, for instance, this was a study about a report that was generated by Gen AI on economic indicators within the Republic of Congo. And it basically, anyway, ignored that there is actually a massive formal economy in Congo, and so the insights was basically totally skewed. Same thing with they call it interpretive drift, where you actually have wrong interpretations if you're not having particular kind of context or insight on how you should interpret certain kinds of output. And of course, data absence quite often can be seen as a proxy of things that are not happening, but it doesn't mean that absence of data indicates lack of activity as well. And so this is just a example, but of course, it was just a way to really emphasize the increased importance of context in data and in AI, and I think data stewardship and data stewards are going to have to really take into account the additional provisioning of context when you make data accessible, right? So that you basically can really understand what is how should you go about using this data? What are the elements that you should take into account if you start using it for AI purposes? And I think that's another development that we see happening as well. The other development that we see happening is then, in order to improve the quality of the data, the quality of the output of AI, we see also statistical agencies entering the fray, right? And statistical agencies have been, of course, at the forefront of thinking about how can we improve the output of generative AI by making sure that official statistics is part of the data set, but it was always a big challenge on how you actually go about making the data AI ready, but also about how do you actually start developing this kind of interrelationship between official statistics and Gen AI models. And so this is a report from the IMF, who has done a lot of work. They are kind of on the forefront of thinking about how you use stats data for improving Gen AI outputs. They've done a lot of work on kind of RAG models in the past, but this report basically gives an insight on what they have done with regard to something called StatGPT, which is not a model, but it's basically a query layer, because they came to the conclusion that, okay, so if you feed existing models, then the output is still very incorrect. And so, anyway, if you read the report, you will see all kinds of benchmarking that they've done with regard to if you use if you even with RAG models, if you use one Gen AI service, anyway, what's the accuracy of the output if you ask a factual question, right? And turns out it was very hard to do. So what they did was basically developing a query layer that translates the query, which is almost like, anyway, as I just showed you with the MCP Civic AI tools, where you basically, when you ask a question, then they translate, right? So they use AI to translate that question into a query that makes sense from a official statistics perspective, right? And so, and I think that's an important, and that then automatically can retrieve the information from kind of authoritative sources. Now, their big push is to really develop this kind of what they call AI-ready data ecosystems. And so this is not a new idea to kind of come up with global trusted data commons where you would have access and you would then query, right? So you would actually have this kind of query layer to access high quality AI-ready data, including, of course, official statistics data. And so they are working on, and this is kind of the effort by the UN Stats Commission. They are working on kind of developing this global trusted data commons that becomes more important in order to secure kind of accurate output as well. And it also is part, of course, as some of you might know, I've been talking about data commons as kind of the pathway forwards. Yesterday here in New York, yesterday evening, I was part of an event and gave a talk about how do we go from open data to data commons. And that's really about making sure that you have access to AI-ready, high-quality data in a way that improves the output, but also in a way that is not extractive, right? And so this is what we are seeing because, as you know, and I've presented this in the past to all of you, we also see this kind of weaponization of openness. And so how do you prevent the weaponization of openness is by coming up with a new institutional form, which is the data commons. And again, this is also suggested here by the IMF. There's another report that was published by the Royal Statistical Society, again, trying to emphasize that statistics remains relevant in the AI era, where they basically showed that statistical thinking, but also statistical output ultimately is essential and needed in order to make sure that AI is trustworthy. Now, the other big development, as I said, one development is kind of from prompt engineering to context engineering. The other one is from open data to data commons. And the other one that we are seeing is actually the arrival of so-called tabular foundational models, which is kind of a very interesting development. And again, in the past, when we spoke about data for AI, the point I quite often made was that actually generative AI doesn't really like tabular data. They like unstructured data because it's large language models. And so they were actually very bad in making sense of tabular data. Now, what we have seen is actually a way to solve that problem, right? To also have models that are really performing well with tabular data. And so these are the tabular foundational models. And so this is now kind of the new trend. Some predict that this will be kind of the next generation of heavy investment success stories where tabular models can be used to leverage that. So these are some of the tabular models that are out there. Then, while all this is happening, we see also the steady decline, however, from openness of data, right? So we see AI can really democratize data, and but in order to do that, you still actually need to have access to data. And what we see is indeed the data winter that unfortunately is getting stronger. There's no spring in sight yet. And so these are just two reports that again give some background about the emergence of the data winter. The first one is the state of open humanitarian data, where they basically look into what is the accessibility these days of humanitarian data. Interestingly enough, the press release was kind of declaring victory in the sense is that we haven't lost that many, but at the same time, they did lose a lot of data that in the past was available. And of course, this was in part the result of the decline in, for instance, development aid to organizations that were collecting humanitarian data, and also, of course, the decline of funding of UN agencies, for instance, that was typically responsible for collecting some of that humanitarian data. But then the other report that we have here is from the OECD, which basically every year they present kind of the Digital Government Index and Open, Useful, and Reusable Data Index. Quite a mouthful, but basically what it does is it kind of monitors what is the current state on reusability of government data and what's the current state as relates to open data. Now, as you see in this chart, there are some countries that are still performing well. There are some countries that have been doing better, but overall, I would say we see kind of a decline in excitement and also a decline in access availability on open government portals as well. And so this is another exhibit as it relates to the data winter that we've been discussing as well. And of course, one reason why we have the data winter is because there's also this kind of data extraction happening. And so at the data tank, there's a lot of work being done on how do we prevent extraction of media content, right? Which is another kind of victim in the current extractive developments where publishers, media outlets are really in panic because on the one hand, they need to have their data open because otherwise, like for instance, Google cannot even index their data, so it's not findable and it's also not consumable. But on the other hand, of course, it's now being extracted by Gen AI models in ways that violates every kind of copyright protection that might have been there before. And so what we see is now the whole discussion about how do we move away from this kind of extractive behavior. And so Mistral here over the weekend came out by saying is that, well, for us, it would be fine if we would have to pay for accessing content so that you would actually have publishers have an additional kind of revenue. This, by the way, got massively, there was a massive backlash against the proposal in Europe because they felt like this would be yet another barrier in Europe to innovate in AI, where the rest of the world has access to free data. Europe would have access to data upon payment. And so this is kind of this constant debate between, on the one hand, sovereignty, and on the other hand, openness, on the other hand, extraction, and the other hand, preventing marginalization, right? And so this is kind of this complex environment that we are in, but we also see this kind of data extraction happening in the health data. Some of you might have seen that now development aid data has become a vehicle to then actually extract data, like a lot of the development aid data from the US. In order to have access to the data, have access to the funds, they have to basically also provide access to all their health data. And so this is kind of a kind of what some have called a recolonization of some of the data sources that are out there. And again, this is raising all kinds of concerns without having easy solutions to a large extent. And again, it's not going to be one solution that will have to be considered as well. Now, in addition to that, there are also ongoing policy developments, of course. So one policy development that might be interesting to look into is the kind of Article 40 from the Digital Services Act. For those in Europe, so the Digital Services Act has one provision, i.e. Article 40, which mandates that platforms should provide access to their data for research, right? And especially research as it relates to kind of political and democratic activities. And anyway, while Article 40 has been there, everyone was kind of waiting to get further guidance from the data protection authorities who are in charge of developing the guidance and overseeing whether Article 40 is implemented. And this is kind of the guidance that everyone was waiting for, because the question here, and again, from a data stewardship perspective, it's always about how do you define who should have access, right? And so here, this guidance basically provides requirements for applicants, right, on what are the elements that they have to meet in order to be seen as legible to have access to some of the data from platforms, right? And so this is about who is a researcher, how do you prove you're a researcher, how do you make sure you understand how to handle data responsibly. And so this is kind of those research passports that we've been talking about in some of the data stewards bootcamps that we've had that are now being promoted through this guidance as well, so that you have a clear guidance on who can actually apply to have access to data as well. And then the other example here, and because there are many other ones, but the other example here is from the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. And it's a really interesting, highly recommended, a really interesting guidance. I think I had it open here somewhere, where they really have, anyway, the African Commission has really made and its advances on how do you promote and harness data access as a tool for advancing human rights. So this is kind of from a human rights perspective, but also an SDG perspective as well. And so in the guidance and the guidelines, they really provide great opportunities to kind of enforce and enable states to provide access to data, especially public data. And I think this goes like the next layer of guidance on how you can provide access to open data in alignment with human rights, but also doing so in a way that actually supports sustainable development. And I highly recommend everyone, if you're interested, to actually look at some of the provisions because a lot of thought went in that as well. So that's kind of as it relates to the policy developments, and also as it relates to kind of a curation of some of the elements that we have witnessed. As always, we also want to share some propaganda on what we've been up to. And so the first thing that some of you might have seen is that now we actually have a dedicated website for the data stewards bootcamps and for the data stewards activity. So if you go to datastewards.net, there you will find you will find what we are offering, and some of you might be in the pictures as well, so that you're now, anyway, if someone stops you at the street and says, you must be a data steward, now we know where it came from. But so these are kind of our offerings. And also you can see what are we working on at the moment. So as we are also going to have the modules that are becoming there. But at the moment, we have a data stewards bootcamp active in Milan. And we also have, which I will tell a little bit about in a second, a seminar series happening with regard to open data as a foundation for AI innovation. And what is coming here soon is also where we will have a data stewards bootcamp for those working on pandemic preparedness and response as well. And that's going to open up soon, I hope, because this is meant to take place in June as well. So that's kind of, and again, feel free, because we're always depending on you as our ambassadors as well. Feel free to share this with your community. And also, this is kind of a way where we then will keep everyone abreast of what's happening as well. And you can also find other blogs there. And of course, what we discussed today will also be available as a blog on that website as well. Now, as I said, in addition to that, currently I'm also moderating a seminar series at one of our sister initiatives called Innovate.us, which is mainly focused on for US state officials, but is available for everyone. And so what we are focusing on here is open data as a foundation for AI. So far, we've had two seminars already. The first one where I introduce kind of use cases, including MCP, where AI can be a tool for data democratization. The second one, we had the Chief Innovation Officer from the city of Boston present the MCP efforts that they have been doing in Boston. The next one will be from an organization called opendata.org. And then we also will have the person who was in charge of census, the MCP server for the US Census, will also speak at a certain point in time. So keep track if you're interested. All the presentations are available online, and so you can also go and see whether this is relevant as well. The other thing that we have released is kind of two publications. The first one was kind of because I get asked a lot, what is data governance? And everyone is confused what it actually is. And so in order to make my life easier, so that I don't always have to explain, but can say, check this, we developed this kind of data governance Q&A, which is what is data governance? And so how do we prevent it to become jargon, but what do we actually mean and what are some of the trends? So that's the first report that we released here. And actually this week, we also kind of released this kind of other scan, as we call it, which is kind of about data governance innovations, right? Because this is a fast-moving environment. And my frustration quite often is that when people talk about data governance, they talk about data governance as things have not evolved and as if we have no new tools to actually govern data. And so this is kind of an attempt to at least point to some of the developments that are happening, such as privacy enhancing technologies, data commons, and so on, but also AI agents as well. So that's something, if you're interested, to check out. And then other elements is that we also recently developed an overview of, because as some of you might know, we have this repository where we monitor developments in data access policy or open data policy. And so every quarter, we kind of take stock on what is happening. And so this is kind of our taking stock on what's happening in data access policy, where we both see advances, but also kind of, again, backsliding, including, for instance, in Europe, the digital omnibus that are really limiting what the progress was. And then we also published kind of the selected reading on indigenous data governance, because one of the projects that we have is, and that we will make public soon, is kind of a data commons incubator that we're currently working on with UNESCO on data commons incubator for indigenous languages and cultures. And so we will launch that soon. But in order to inform that, of course, we've done some kind of homework with regard to what are some principles, like the care principles and other principles that need to be taken into account for indigenous data governance as well. And then at the data tank, as I said, we are doing for the Adesium Foundation, we are kind of scanning the current concerns with regard to access to media content for AI purposes. And so we had a session, can't remember, last week, I guess, last week. And we're going to have another session coming up on April 20th, where we basically invite kind of thought leaders from the media community to reflect on how should we go about providing access to media content in ways that is less extractive, but also in ways that creates new business models for media